They say the people who can break your heart the deepest are the ones who raised you. The ones who looked into your eyes the day you were born and swore they'd protect you no matter what. But what happens when those same people start looking at you like you failed them? What happens when the home that's supposed to be your safe place becomes the weapon that cuts you down? If you're listening right now, let me tell you, my story isn't just about family conflict. It's about betrayal in its quietest form, the kind that happens under your own roof. And if you've ever felt like nothing you do is ever enough, I promise you, you're going to see yourself in what happened to me. Because the night my parents told me I wasn't just a disappointment but also dead weight, I realized I had two choices: stay in the house that was suffocating me, or walk out into a world I wasn't sure I was ready for. And believe me, I walked. My name is Julia. I'm 25 years old, and I work as a graphic designer at a small creative agency in Portland, Oregon. If you ask me how it all began, I'd tell you it didn't start with rent demands and shouting. It started a long time ago, back in the suburbs where I grew up, in the little beige house with green shutters that always had holiday decorations my mom would change on the exact first day of every season. To neighbors, we probably looked perfect. Dad was a senior accountant at a well-known financial firm in the city. Mom left her teaching job when I was born to become a full-time homemaker, and I was their only child. The one they pinned all their hopes on. Most of my childhood memories are warm. Sunday dinners at 5 sharp, summer road trips carefully planned on a color-coded calendar, and a house where stability was the rule. But laced into all of that stability was expectation, a very specific idea of what success should look like. They never missed a chance to point out how my dad's degree set us up so comfortably, how careful planning and practical career choices built a life worth having. But I wasn't wired that way. While other kids loved sports or music lessons, I disappeared into sketchbooks. Whole hours of my day would vanish as I filled page after page with characters, patterns, and imaginary worlds. By high school, I was teaching myself digital art on the family computer, layering textures, playing with typography, seeing the world in shapes and color palettes. Mom would pause sometimes, watching me work, but her praise always came wrapped in a warning. "You're so good, Julia," she'd say. "But maybe you should spend more time on math or science. You can paint on the weekends, as a hobby." The real battle began when college applications rolled around. Dad pushed for economics. Mom said nursing or teaching. I had a different plan. Design school. I can still picture the look on my father's face at dinner the night I said it out loud. Pure disappointment, like I'd just told him I wanted to run away and join the circus. He said, "Julia, we're not paying tens of thousands of dollars for you to doodle on a computer. That's not a career." Those words sent me running to my bedroom, clutching my sketch pad like it was the only thing keeping my dream alive. After weeks of shouting matches and silent dinners, we compromised. I applied to a state university with a strong design program, on the condition I doubled down with a minor in business, so I had something to fall back on. It wasn't exactly the path I wanted, but it was one step toward doing what I loved. 4 years later, degree in hand, I was still caught in the undertow of their judgment. Graduation dumped me straight into a weak job market, and after months of rejection letters, I felt like I might actually collapse under the weight of their "I told you so's." But then came my first offer, at a tiny but lively marketing outfit called Ember Creative. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but the moment I walked into that office with its creaky floorboards and half-painted walls, I felt like I belonged. Almost like I'd stumbled into a secret society of people who saw things the way I did, in fonts, colors, and textures, not just numbers. Still, my paycheck couldn't touch Portland rent. That's when my parents gently suggested moving back home to save money. It was supposed to be temporary, 6 months, maybe a year, just until I found something better paying. At first, it sounded like support, a safety net. I told myself I'd make it work, even though deep in my gut, I knew sharing a roof with them again meant more commentary, more comparisons. Still, I packed up my single apartment, said goodbye to the independence I had just started tasting, and returned to the house I'd sworn I'd never live in again. The first couple of months were surprisingly fine. I commuted every morning with my laptop bag, made my small contributions to chores, even got Mom to let me cook dinner on Thursdays. Sometimes Dad would look at my projects and nod, pretending to understand what I was showing him. "As long as you're happy," Mom would say, smiling softly, though her eyes said something else, something closer to, "When will you get serious?" Then the change came. It started small, slipping into conversations unnoticed like shadows lengthening at dusk. Dad compared accountant salaries to design salaries whenever the topic of money came up. Mom called my evening freelance projects playtime. At first, I brushed it off. Generational gap, I told myself. But little by little, their remarks grew sharper, more pointed. Until one night, it finally snapped. I'd just gotten home from work, still buzzing from good news. A 2-an-hour raise and a new title at Ember. For me, it was huge. I thought, stupidly, maybe, that they'd be happy for me. I placed the folder with the promotion letter on the kitchen counter like proof of progress, like an offering. But Mom didn't even look up from chopping onions. "That's nice, Julia," she said. "Does this mean you can afford your own place yet?" The silence in the room burned worse than the onions stinging my eyes. And when Dad joined in, it felt like being gutted right there in the kitchen. $2? After the hours you put in, that's nothing. Seriously, kid, don't you think it's time you look into something practical? You've got that business minor. Why not use it? My hands tightened around the folder until the paper crumpled. "This is a big step in my industry," I told them, my voice shaking. "It means doors are opening. This is progress." Progress was the last thing they saw. To them, it was proof that I was stuck in a hobby calling itself a career. Their eyes said it all, disappointment dressed as concern. And in that moment, standing there with my small victory crushed between us, I realized something terrifying. They weren't just against my choices. They were against the very core of who I was becoming. I didn't know it yet, but that night was only the beginning of the fracture. A fracture that would widen until home didn't feel like home at all. The thing about disappointment is that it doesn't always come in the form of slammed doors or raised voices. Sometimes it's quieter, more insidious, like a whisper you can't stop replaying once it's in your head. For me, it became the silence after every small achievement, the unspoken sentence that always hung in the air, unfinished. "That's nice, Julia, but..." And as the months crawled forward in my parents' house, that silence began to bear down harder than their actual words. My mornings were always the same. Alarm is set for 6:15. I'm on the bus by 7 with a lukewarm coffee and my overstuffed laptop bag. Ember Creative's office was on the 3rd floor of a refurbished brick building downtown, complete with drafty windows and a creaky elevator. I loved it there despite its quirks, maybe because those quirks suited me. The walls were covered in mood boards and concept sketches. Desks were cluttered with Pantone swatches and coffee ring stains. Everyone in that bullpen had the same kind of restless energy I did, living off deadlines and caffeine, chasing the perfect line weight or hex code like it was gold. If home made me feel like I was out of place, work made me feel like I finally belonged. But if Ember was oxygen, home was becoming carbon monoxide. Quiet, invisible, suffocating. Even on weekdays when I slipped quietly into the house after 10-hour shifts, Dad would be waiting in the living room. "You're still working on those logos?" he'd ask, gesturing toward my laptop. "You need to think about a future where you won't be stuck in some entry-level job forever." And if I tried to stand up for myself, Mom was right there with her own subtle daggers. "At least you're having fun. Some people don't get to enjoy what they do." The words fun and hobby became poison. They didn't mean to cut, but they cut all the same. It got worse when family gatherings came around. There was always an unwelcome comparison, most often involving my cousin Nicole. She was a financial analyst at a big firm back east, and every story about her read like a press release. "Nicole just got her second bonus," my mother said one night at dinner, smiling at her phone like she was reading breaking news. "She's already been approved for a mortgage on her first condo." "Isn't that incredible?" The way she said it made my blood pressure rise because the subtext wasn't even subtext anymore. It was a billboard flashing above the table. Why can't you be more like her? Every time I opened my mouth to explain what I'd been working on, rebrands, campaigns, digital layouts, they met me with either a blank look or dismissive side comments. That might be impressive if you had steady hours and better pay. That's cool, Julia, but when's the last time you got a promotion that actually mattered? Wouldn't it be nice if your work allowed you to buy something more permanent than those sketchbooks? At first, I tried to educate them. I printed salary reports on senior designers. I showed them profiles of creative directors at major companies leading national campaigns. I pulled up real data to prove that design was a career with growth, not a dead end. But none of it mattered. To Dad, there were only two numbers on the scale of success: income and stability. To Mom, there was only one test: respectability. And to them, my career barely registered. One night, it all came to a head in the worst possible way. I'd just scored one of the biggest wins of my young career. Our design team landed a rebrand, pitch with a chain of local organic grocers. I'd worked for weeks preparing logo variations, typography hierarchies, and a visual identity system. And when it came time for the client meeting, Mia, my boss, asked me to present my own segment. My heart was in my throat, but I executed flawlessly. The client smiled through the slides, nodding with every transition until finally they said, "This is exactly the direction we've been looking for." It was the kind of moment you replay in your head when you doubt yourself. The validation you need to know you're not just treading water, you're swimming. Mia pulled me aside afterward, her tone calm but her eyes bright with pride. "Julia," she said, "keep this up and you won't just be a junior designer anymore. I see the team lead in your future." My chest felt like it might crack open from hope. I floated home with the news, practically rehearsing how I'd tell my parents, foolishly thinking maybe this would be the thing that finally broke through. The house was dark when I returned, except for the light in their bedroom. I pushed open the door, already smiling, ready to share. But then I froze, because my name was on their lips, and not kindly. "Julia's 25 and she's still acting like these little art projects are enough," Mom was saying on the phone, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard. "She's going to keep pretending this is a career until she's 30 and still living in her old room." Dad's voice followed, low but firm. "We can't keep doing this, Donna. She isn't a child anymore. She has no incentive to grow up. We cover her housing, her meals, her bills. She's dead weight at this point. Dead weight." The phrase hit me like being slapped in the dark. My chest burned, my ears rang. I must have made a sound because the line went silent. I pushed the door open without hesitation, standing in the doorway with my fists clenched. They looked at me like I was a stranger. "How long have you been there?" Dad demanded. "Long enough," I replied, my voice not shaking even though every bone in my body was. "Long enough to hear you call me dead weight." The room filled with tension so thick I could hardly breathe. Mom dropped her phone, stammering. "Julia, honey, we didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I cut her off. "You've been saying it in different ways for months. Tonight, you just dropped the mask." Dad squared his shoulders like a man ready for a fight. "We're being realistic. You can't live here forever while making pennies on drawings. It's time you pay rent, $800 a month plus utilities. Otherwise, you need to figure out your next steps." My hands trembled at my sides, but I managed to whisper, "You don't want rent. You want me to change. You want to force me into something that isn't who I am?" Dad's eyes hardened. "We want respect, Julia. Maybe this will finally teach you." Respect. The word clanged in my mind like a broken bell. Respect wasn't demanding rent from your child while you sat in judgment of every decision she made. Respect wasn't whispering to relatives about her failures behind her back. Respect wasn't calling her dead weight. Something broke in me right then. A quiet, decisive snap. I fought with them until after midnight, years of unspoken frustration spilling out of me like wildfire. They threw back examples, arguments, accusations. By the end, my voice was raw. Their faces were stone. and the house I thought was my anchor finally revealed itself for what it really was: a cage. That night, as I lay staring at the pale blue walls of my childhood bedroom, I realized the truth staring back at me from the ceiling fan blades spinning slowly overhead. I couldn't stay another month. Not another week. Not even another day. I had to leave. And the only way I could do it was quietly. Before dawn. If you've ever had the kind of night where sleep simply refuses to touch you, where the dark ceiling above feels like a judgment, then you already know how it felt for me. I lay there in my childhood room, the one that still smelled faintly of the lavender spray my mom used every spring, my suitcases tucked deep in the closet, my shelves cluttered with trinkets from long-forgotten birthdays. Each object seemed to whisper at me, "Are you really going to do this? Are you really going to leave now?" The hardest part wasn't the thought of starting over. The hardest part was knowing I'd have to walk out of the house my parents built, the one that felt like it was supposed to be my foundation in life, and accept that it had turned into something else entirely. A place I could love, but not live in. I waited. I could hear the faint sound of the white noise machine my dad always used humming through the wall. At 11:45, their light went dark. By 12:15, the house was silent, save for the occasional creak of wood expanding and the faraway rattle of pipes adjusting to the first chill of autumn. My heart drummed so loud I thought they might hear it as I swung my legs off the bed, the old carpet scratchy beneath my feet. I dragged the suitcase out, the zipper dragging sharp in the quiet. Packing quickly wasn't an option. Every choice felt like a judgment call about who I was and who I could still be. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, my design tablet, those were easy. But then came the gray box of keepsakes under my bed, stuffed with every small artifact that carried meaning. A snow globe from Seattle, where we'd once taken a family trip before Dad's warnings about career choices had built walls between us. The quilt from my grandmother that symbolized comfort, safety. A photo of the three of us at Disney, with my dad carrying me on his shoulders and my mom laughing in oversized sunglasses. Those things didn't fit into a suitcase. And maybe that was the cruelest metaphor of all. Some parts of your story you can't carry with you, even when they hurt too much to leave behind. I settled on keeping a few small items. The quilt, carefully folded at the bottom of the bag. The art books that shaped me. The photo I tucked into my sketchpad so it wouldn't crumple. Everything else I left behind in the room that suddenly felt like a museum, preserving a girl who didn't exist anymore. Around 2:30 in the morning, when the quiet intensified and courage finally outweighed fear, I reached for my phone and texted Amanda, my best friend from college. Amanda was the kind of person who embodied chaos in the best way. Bartender by night, tattoo lover, lived with her boyfriend Kyle in an apartment too small for two, but somehow warm enough for three if they had to squeeze. "Are you awake?" I typed, fingers shaking as though the act of asking for help was harder than the confrontation I'd had hours earlier. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then her reply lit up my screen. "Just got home from work." "What's wrong?" My throat tightened. I typed fast before I could lose nerve. "Huge fight with my parents. Need to move out immediately. Please tell me I can crash on your couch for a few days." Her answer came almost instantly, like a safety net appearing out of thin air. "Come whenever. Our couch is your couch. There's a spare key under the frog planter by the door if we're not home. Love you. Just be safe." I pressed the phone to my chest for a moment, relief surging in waves. I had somewhere to go. Even if it wasn't permanent, it was a lifeline. By 3:30, my bags were zipped, stacked by the door like soldiers waiting for orders. The hallway felt too long, the stairs creaked like they were telling on me, but I kept moving. Each step felt like a goodbye to something invisible but binding. Downstairs, the house was still filled with traces of us. Family photos on the walls, the embroidered sampler my mom's aunt had given her, a row of mugs from vacations where we'd laughed side by side. Passing those things made my stomach ache, but I forced myself not to stop. Then came the hardest moment of all. I wrote the note. I sat at my old desk where I'd done homework as a kid. pen poised over the paper while emotions blurred my vision. Every sentence I started felt wrong, too defensive, too emotional, too desperate. And then, finally, I found my words. Mom and Dad, after last night's conversation, I've realized it's time for me to become fully independent. I've found another place to stay, and by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm safe, and I'll be in touch once I'm settled. Julia, simple, clean, maybe even cold. But I couldn't give them the satisfaction of my emotions right then. I needed to protect the fragile courage holding me together. I left the note on my bed, plain as day. By 4:45, the dawn was bleeding faint light through the blinds. A rideshare idled outside, headlights swallowing the curb. My bags thumped as I dragged them onto the porch. I turned back to face the house, my house for so much of my life. The green shutters. The porch swing Dad had hung one summer when I was 12. The tree I used to climb to look into my neighbor's yard. Memories pressed tight into my chest. And then came the tears I'd been holding back. My hand hovered over the house key. For a moment, I thought about leaving it, about slamming the door shut forever. But I couldn't do it. Maybe it was weakness, maybe it was love, probably both. But I slipped the keys into my pocket. I needed the option, even if I never used it. When I got into the car, the driver glanced at my bags with a small smile. "Moving out?" he asked casually. I looked out the window before answering. "Something like that. Where are you headed?" I thought of Amanda's cramped couch, of showing up in the early dawn hours at her building like some refugee with nothing but 2 bags and a stubborn streak. Instead, I said, "Downtown. Drop me at my office," because I couldn't face Amanda yet. Not while I was still shaking. Not while I was still holding back the kind of sob that splits you open. Work was safer, at least for the moment. The sun was rising by the time we pulled into the city. I stepped out with my bags rolling behind me, the streets filling with early commuters. Ember Creative's old brick building loomed overhead, safe and foreign all at once. I dragged my suitcase past the security desk, forcing a smile when Jerome, the guard, teased, "What, moving in?" I forced a laugh. "Just big projects," I said, knowing I wasn't fooling anyone. When I finally sank into my desk chair, I let my head tip forward, my chest hollow. The house I'd grown up in was behind me now. And what waited in front of me, the reality of life on my own with no safety net, no plan, no guaranteed home, hovered like a storm cloud. My phone buzzed at 10 a.m. Mom called. Then Dad, over and over. 15 missed calls, then 20. Texts filled the screen. "Where are you? This is completely irresponsible." Then, "Please, Julia, just let us know you're safe." I typed 4 words back. "I'm safe." I need space. It was the bravest lie I'd ever told. Because the truth was I wasn't safe yet. I was homeless, broken, and standing right at the edge of 1,000 unknowns. But sometimes, standing at the edge is exactly where you finally learn how to jump. There's a strange kind of humiliation in living temporarily on someone else's couch. You tell yourself it's just for a few days, that it's no big deal, that you'll be gone before anyone notices the sagging cushions or the extra pile of shoes crowding up their entryway. But when I stepped into Amanda and Kyle's tiny apartment with my 2 overstuffed bags and the brittle remains of my pride, I could feel those truths cracking. I wasn't a guest stopping by. I wasn't passing through. I was displaced. And no matter how brightly Amanda smiled, no matter how hard she hugged me and said, "You're home now," I knew I was just one wrong move away from overstaying my welcome. Their apartment was barely big enough for 2, the kind of place where you had to maneuver around each other just to pass through the kitchen. The couch sagged in the middle so much that it dipped like a hammock. At night it squeaked every time I turned over, the sound echoing through their thin walls until I lay paralyzed, afraid of keeping them up. And yet, despite the discomfort, I clung to it like a lifeline. That couch meant freedom. No one looked over my shoulder while I worked. No one compared me to cousins. No one demanded rent in exchange for dignity. Even on nights I barely slept, waking with aches in my back, I woke free. That counted for something. Amanda was relentless in her kindness. She cleared out 2 shelves in the bathroom so I could store my things, made space in the fridge for my groceries, and told me a dozen times, "Seriously, don't feel bad. We love having you here." But guilt gnawed at me anyway. I knew their rhythms, their private moments, their late-night laughter as they passed a bottle of wine across the table. And I was there, the third body in a space built for 2. I swore to myself that every free hour would be dedicated to fixing the situation. I couldn't let couchsurfing become my identity. After work, between projects, even in the dim circle of lamplight while Amanda and Kyle slept, I scrolled apartment listings. Studios in Portland hit me like a financial gut punch. Even the cheapest, in ragged neighborhoods with appliances older than me, were out of reach once I factored in bills and student loans. For 3 nights, I cycled through the same realization. Anything decent was impossible. By day 4, I expanded my search to roommates wanted ads. It was a humbling pivot, but humility was already my new reality. I set appointments with strangers in barely rehabbed houses with sticky floors. I sat through awkward interviews with people hunting for tenants, not friends, and one girl who asked me point blank, "So what are you running away from?" When I didn't answer, she laughed like it was a joke. But inside, it shredded me. Then, on the 5th day, I walked into a cramped but vibrant apartment in Buckman, 3 mismatched coffee mugs on the counter, black and white photos taped to the fridge. The ad had been direct. 2 creatives seeking a 3rd roommate, $700 all-inclusive. Jenna answered the door, a photographer with camera straps still hanging off her shoulders. Zach leaned in from the next room, headphones slipped to one ear, his apartment half filled with speakers and sound wiring. They weren't polished, but they were warm, their energy unpretentious. I liked them instantly. "The last roommate moved in with her boyfriend and left us hanging," Jenna explained, showing me the tiny bedroom I'd get, small enough that a full-size bed took up most of the space. But the rent was fair, the area safe, and most importantly, they understood. They knew the late nights chasing deadlines and the odd hours wrapped in creativity. "The place works for me," I said, surprising myself with how sure I sounded, "if you'll have me." 2 days later, I signed the lease and turned over nearly all my savings, deposit and first month's rent. My hands shook as I wrote the check. It was everything I had left, but it bought me one precious thing I couldn't measure in dollars: independence. Meanwhile, the texts from my parents hadn't stopped. Morning, afternoon, night. The tone shifted daily, from outrage, "This is completely irresponsible, call us now," to guilt, "Your mother can't sleep, she's sick with worry," to plain demand, "Give us your address. We need to talk face to face." Sometimes I typed a reply. Sometimes I couldn't bring myself to. The only ones I sent were mechanical, "I'm safe. I need space." Anything more opened the door wider than I could bear. My absence was raw for them. My silence was worse. But if I cracked, if I let them reel me back in before I was ready, I knew I'd lose this fragile foothold on freedom. At work, my exhaustion started to show. I was coming in with circles under my eyes, stacks of rental applications tucked between design briefs. And still, Mia, bless her, never pried, only gave me that one arched eyebrow that felt like both support and challenge. "You holding it together?" she asked one night as the others cleared out. Her jewelry caught the light as she leaned across her desk. "I'm figuring it out," I said. It was the closest thing to a truth I could offer. 10 minutes later, she organized something I would never forget. The next day, a box appeared at my workstation with a Post-it note, "Starter Kit." We've all been there. Inside was a mismatched set of dishes someone no longer needed, 6 towels, an extra coffee maker, and even a little desk lamp. Tara from accounting chipped in a bedding set. Jorge offered up an unused lamp. Pieces of their lives stitched together my new one, and when I set them down in that tiny green-walled bedroom in Buckman, it hit me. I wasn't just moving out. I was building. The money was tight, tighter than I'd ever lived with. Every dollar in a spreadsheet. Rent and utilities swallowed whole weeks of paychecks before they even landed in my account. I cut my own hair with shaky hands over the bathroom sink. learned how to cook rice and beans 6 different ways, bicycled instead of commuting by bus when weather allowed. Every weekend was survival in slow motion, but I wasn't in my parents' house anymore, and that meant freedom, even in hunger. By the 3rd week, something unexpected happened. Mia pulled me into her office with eyes glowing like a challenge. "Julia, I'm handing you the lead on this next client. Big rebrand. The timeline's brutal, but the portfolio value will be worth it. I trust you." The words went off like fireworks in my chest. It meant late nights. It meant sleeping 3, maybe 4 hours. It also meant a temporary pay bump to cushion my razor-thin budget. Most of all, it meant professional proof that my father's words were wrong. My career wasn't a hobby. It wasn't even just a job. It was a path. And every late night, every extra hour hunched over my design files, felt like another brick stacking into something I could stand on without apology. Yet even with my successes, the loneliness crept in like a draft I couldn't seal. Each time my phone lit with my mom's texts, "We miss you. Come home. Just talk to us." A part of me longed to call, to unclench my throat and tell her more than just, "I'm fine." But then Dad's words came back, sharper than any message. Dead weight. And I knew if I went back too early, I'd collapse under that weight again. So I sat in my tiny new room, string lights casting soft shadows, ramen boiling on the stove, the hum of Jenna and Zach's music filling the apartment, and for the first time in years, I whispered the kind of truth that scared me. I'm on my own now. And I think this has to be the only way forward. But even as the words left my mouth, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "We know where you work. Expect to see us soon." My blood ran cold, because I knew exactly who it was. The text sat on my phone screen like it was burning itself into the glass. "We know where you work. Expect to see us soon." My stomach pitched. I didn't need to ask who had sent it. The blend of authority and intrusion, the quiet demand folded inside the words, there was no mistaking it. All morning, I stole glances at the glass lobby doors below Ember Creative's office, waiting for familiar shapes to appear, imagining my parents stepping into a world they'd never bothered to understand. Each passing hour was a war between focus and dread. My cursor hovered over design layouts I'd been perfecting for days, but my brain was half stuck on the image of Mom and Dad standing on our bright orange welcome rug, eyes searching for me, ready to drag me into another lecture about how I was throwing my future away. By 2 o'clock, anxiety had turned me brittle. I was carefully outlining vector paths when my desk phone buzzed. "Julia," said Mia's calm but questioning voice, "the front desk says your parents are here to see you." The phone trembled in my hand. For a second, I almost told her to make them leave, to pretend I wasn't here. But hiding would only postpone the inevitable. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. "Tell them I'll be out in a minute." When I pushed through the door to reception, there they were. My mother still had the same pursed lips that meant she was biting back tears, her handbag clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. My father stood straight-backed beside her, an image of composure for anyone else. But I knew the rigidity was his way of controlling anger that worked like fire underneath. "Julia." My mother took half a step forward, then stalled when she saw I wasn't moving to hug her. "We've been so worried." My father slipped seamlessly into his role. "We need to talk." His tone, clipped and commanding, carried less concern and more authority, as if I were still 16 and they'd caught me sneaking in after curfew. My coworker's eyes flicked toward us. Even Jerome, the receptionist, shifted uncomfortably in his chair as tension spread like smoke. Before anyone could make it worse, Mia leaned out from the creative bullpen, silver jewelry catching the light. Her eyes landed on me, reading the scene instantly. "Everything okay, Julia?" "My parents stopped by unexpectedly," I managed, forcing my face into neutrality. She gave me her subtle nod of support. "Take the time you need. I'll reschedule the client call." Gratitude surged through me, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I gestured toward the door. "There's a cafe around the corner." 15 minutes. "That's all I can give you." The walk there was silence incarnate. I stuck my hands deep in my jacket pockets, forcing myself to keep measured strides, though I could feel Mom's eyes trying to catch mine and Dad's shadow looming closer than I liked. I didn't want the conversation to happen, not in the slightest. But I knew dodging them wouldn't work forever. Inside the cafe, low chatter hummed, and the smell of espresso beans clung to the air. I deliberately chose a corner table with a clear line to the exit. If this exploded, I wanted a way out. "You look thin," Mom said before the barista even brought our drinks. "Are you eating properly?" I kept my jaw tight. "I'm fine. Let's get to the point. Why are you here?" They exchanged quick glances. Then Dad spoke, tapping his hand lightly against the tabletop in a rhythm I recognized as his attempt to restrain frustration. "We came home last week and found your room nearly empty. You didn't just leave for a few days. You moved out." "Yes," I said flatly. "I did." Mom leaned forward, a hand twitching as if to reach for mine before stopping in midair. "That note you left? That didn't explain anything. One disagreement and you disappear without a word. One disagreement?" My laugh startled the man at the neighboring table. It was jagged, humorless. "It wasn't one disagreement. It was the culmination of months, years of you dismissing every choice I've ever made, every success I've managed, and then calling me dead weight to my own aunt." That silenced them for a beat. Mom's lips trembled. Dad finally exhaled. "We were frustrated, Julia. We've watched you pour yourself into something with limited prospects, while friends' kids your age have careers and homes. We want stability for you, security." "By your definition," I said, voice sharp. "But your definition isn't mine. I've been promoted. I earn my own income. I'm building something piece by piece. That's success to me." Dad pinched the bridge of his nose. "But the financial reality is exactly what I'm handling," I cut in. "Yes, it's tight. Yes, it's exhausting. But it's mine. I'm paying my bills. I'm leading projects. I'm finding my way without you pulling the strings." At that, Mom broke. "We miss you," she whispered. "The house feels empty without you." For a long moment, my anger softened just enough to let the ache in. Part of me wanted to reach across, to reassure her the way I used to. But then the old words echoed in my head, the ones that sent me packing bags at 4 a.m. Dead weight. I stayed rooted in my chair. "I needed space to grow without constant criticism," I said, my voice firm again. "In that house, every day told me my choices weren't valid, that my career wasn't respectable, that who I was wasn't enough." Can you understand how that felt? Dad hesitated. His eyes lowered, shame flickering for just a heartbeat. Finally, he sighed. "Maybe we didn't handle it the right way." Mom reached out again. "We just don't want you struggling forever like this. We were scared for you." Her words landed heavier than I wanted to admit. Fear. That was the engine beneath their anger. Not just control. Fear of me failing, of me ending up with nothing. Fear of what they'd lived or given up themselves. But empathy doesn't erase damage. "It doesn't matter if you were scared," I said softly. "The way you expressed it, it broke something in me. Respect doesn't survive when every conversation reminds you that you've disappointed your family." Silence stretched, broken only by clinking mugs at nearby tables. Finally, Dad clasped his hands together, formal as though this were a business negotiation. "So what happens now? Are you cutting us out permanently?" My throat closed briefly. The truth was, I didn't know. What I did know was what I couldn't go back to. What happens now is that I keep building my life on my terms. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be one where my choices are respected, even when you don't understand them. I won't come back for Sunday dinners where I get compared to Nicole or where my career gets dismissed as a phase. If that's all you've got to give, then... No, I can't keep you close. For once, neither of them argued. My father's expression shifted, like he was choking down every line he'd been rehearsing since I left. My mother blinked slowly, her eyes glistening, but for the first time she didn't tell me to give up. The barista came by, refilling cups, and we let her break the moment. I pulled my jacket tighter, already half rising from my chair. "So this is it?" Dad asked. His voice was softer than I expected. "This is a beginning," I said quietly. "If you let it be." When I walked back out into the street, leaving them behind at the cafe table, The air felt clearer, sharper, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. For the first time since leaving home, I'd said the truth to their faces. It hadn't healed everything, not by a long shot, but it had planted something, a seed of possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild on new terms. Still, as I rounded the corner toward my office, I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't over. Because saying the words was one thing, but could they really change? Could they actually learn to see me not as dead weight, but as the full version of myself? And deep down, another fear began to stir. What if they couldn't? Independence doesn't land all at once like some glorious victory. It arrives in fragments, scattered across long nights and tiny triumphs you almost forget to notice. For me, it was discovering the satisfaction of rearranging my microscopic bedroom in Buckman until it felt like more than just 4 walls and a bed. It was making dinner from bulk rice and cheap vegetables, eating cross-legged on the floor with Jenna and Zach, and laughing until I forgot how tight my budget really was. It was stringing a line of old fairy lights across my ceiling and realizing that, for the first time, this little corner of the world was mine. No questions. No comparisons. No conditions. Amanda still checked in constantly. "How's it feel to have your own place finally?" she asked over drinks one Friday as we hunched over our pints in a dim bar near her work. I didn't know how to answer. It felt terrifying. It felt liberating. It felt like juggling knives while balancing on a rope. But more than anything, it felt real. Not comfort disguised as control, not silence coated in judgment. Real. "It feels like breathing without someone timing my breaths," I finally said. Living with Jenna and Zach began to teach me things no lecture from my parents ever had. Jenna's photography career was feast or famine. One month she scraped by with weddings and portrait shoots. The next she scored a gallery feature that paid more than I'd make all year. Zach spent days struggling for clients in his sound engineering work, but then got picked up for a music festival gig that more than covered his bills. Neither of them had steady 9-to-5 jobs. Neither of them fit in the mold my parents worshipped. But they were alive in their work, unashamed, unafraid of the zigzags. Their lives were proof that an unconventional path wasn't the same as a doomed one. I learned slowly but surely how to survive on less. I built spreadsheets to track every penny, kept my grocery list rigid, decided I could wait months before buying a proper dresser, and used stacked crates instead. Kyle gave me a second-hand blanket. Jenna loaned me extra mugs. The room was far from polished, but one night, looking around at the glow of the fairy lights, the soft hum of Zach's music through the wall, I whispered to myself, "This is mine." And that meant more than anything. But even as I was learning how to stand straighter, I couldn't ignore the constant hum of my phone. My parents weren't done trying. Twice a week, Mom sent messages, some soft, some sharp. "Your cousin just got another raise. Maybe you should talk with her." Then later, "We'd love to see your new place. Just dinner. Just one evening." My father's texts were shorter, blunter. "Call me. This silence is childish. We need to talk like adults." I didn't reply, not right away. I was weary of letting their voices back too soon. My spine was only just steady enough to bear myself. If I let their weight press in again, I wasn't sure I'd hold. My saving grace during this time was work. Ember Creative gave me a way to prove to myself that I wasn't delusional, that all those long nights hunched over designs, all the patience to sit through just one more revision emails, all the stubborn faith that art and career could coexist. It wasn't naive. It was paying off. The client rebrand I'd led crystallized into something bigger than a portfolio piece. Mia walked into my cubicle 3 weeks later with her usual calm expression, but a little smile tugging at her lips. "Julia, you're officially promoted to full designer. Salary bump included. Congratulations, you deserve this one." The salary wasn't life-changing, not by the standards my parents worshipped. But for me, it was evidence. It was momentum that said I wasn't wasting my 20s. I was climbing, even if it was different terrain than my parents had chosen. My coworkers noticed it too. "You're glowing," Jorge teased as he handed me a spare chair for my room. Big raise energy. For the first time in months, my grin was effortless. With the promotion, I could finally buy a bed frame instead of sleeping on the air mattress Tara had lent me. Jenna helped me assemble it, both of us fumbling with screws while Zach blasted music too loud. When we lifted the mattress onto it together, I grinned so hard I nearly cried. A bed doesn't sound like much, but that frame meant stability. It meant building a home one piece at a time. Of course, in quiet hours, I still thought of my parents. I wondered if they regretted the words they'd said, the words that sent me packing, in the same way I regretted how heavy they felt inside me. Some evenings, curled under my quilt, I'd stare at the ceiling and picture Mom's hands busy in the kitchen, Dad tapping his calculator in his home office. Still familiar, still alien. Which is why their next move stunned me. It wasn't another sharp text or guilt-laced voicemail. It was an email from Mom. The subject line read simply, "I want to understand." The message inside caught me off guard. She wrote about how, when she was younger, she'd wanted to be an interior designer. How her own parents forbade it, telling her it wasn't a real career. How she had buried that dream and chosen practicality over passion. And how, seeing me chase design, she found herself torn between admiration and fear, because what I was doing looked so much like the path she had veered away from. "I thought discouraging you would protect you from disappointment," she wrote. "But maybe I only pushed you into disappointment with me." I stared at the screen for a long time, my eyes blurring. It was the first admission she had ever made that wasn't sharpened with advice, that didn't arrive as a demand. It was raw and frighteningly human. I didn't respond, not right away. But I did something else. I considered. Considering that maybe there was space for reconstruction, not of my childhood home, but of the bond I still craved even while I fled it. At the same time, cracks were forming in my father's armor too, though in his way. One Sunday evening, he texted, not comparing me to anyone, not ordering me to call. Just, "Saw the grocery store campaign you worked on. Nice work. I can see why the client approved." 15 words, no more. The driest possible acknowledgement. But from him, it was monumental. It didn't erase the hurt. It didn't erase dead weight, but it planted something small. Something like hope. Months into this new life, balance began to form. I still struggled financially, cooked too many, bland stir-fries, and nursed the ache of parental wounds that healed too slow. But I was also part of a creative community now, attending weekly design meetups, sharing sketches at a local cafe, experimenting at a figure drawing class after work. At those gatherings, for the first time, I didn't have to explain to anyone that design wasn't just a hobby. They understood. They lived it too. I was building a foundation, fragile but mine, independent, but waiting for the test that would prove just how strong it really was. And one autumn afternoon, that test knocked on the door harder than I was ready for. Our office receptionist appeared at my desk, wide-eyed, whispering, "Julia, your parents are here. Again." This time, they weren't just visiting. This time, they'd come with something I never expected to hear. When the receptionist leaned into my workspace, I thought I'd misheard her. "Julia, your parents are here again. They said it's urgent." My fingers froze over the keyboard, the lines of my latest design blurring across the screen. My chest tightened, that same helpless ache I'd felt when I was still living under their roof rushing back. Months of distance, months of silence, the fragile courage I had built. All of it threatened to crumble by just the mention of their presence. I wanted to tell the receptionist to send them away. I wanted to hide in the break room until they left. But this was my workplace, my domain of independence, my arena where their rules didn't carry weight. If I had learned anything lately, it was that running only postponed the inevitable. Whatever they wanted this time, I had to face it. "I'll be right out," I said quietly. And there they were again, waiting in the ember-orange reception area that had always felt like my sanctuary until this very moment. My father, in his signature button-up, posture stiff, jaw tight, gaze flicking toward curious employees hovering nearby. My mother holds her purse with two hands, eyes darting around as though trying to soften the moment with her timid smile. "Julia," Mom whispered, her relief palpable, as if seeing me alive in the flesh confirmed something her mind still doubted. "What is it this time?" I asked evenly, refusing to give them the opening to treat me like a child on trial. "This isn't the place," Dad said quickly. "Can you step out for a few minutes?" Everything in me resisted, but curiosity, the kind that gnaws like hunger, dragged me toward the door. I let them lead me outside onto the crisp autumn sidewalk. Commuters streamed around us, coffee shop windows flickered warm with lights. People lived their daily lives, oblivious to the battle unfolding in the still space between my parents and me. Dad's voice dropped into a tone I rarely heard, heavy and deliberate. "We need to explain something. Something we should have told you sooner." I crossed my arms. "Then say it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They looked at each other, eyes flicking with silent words, until finally Mom broke the silence. "We're struggling financially." It took a second for the words to register. I almost laughed. Struggling financially? My parents, who lectured me endlessly about stability, who worshipped job security, who preached saving and practicality like gospel. It couldn't be true. Dad filled the silence, his voice brittle. "My firm has been cutting back. I've taken a pay cut. Colleagues younger than me, cheaper than me, are replacing people at my level. We've dipped deep into our retirement, just keeping up the appearance that everything is fine. The market hit us harder than we admitted." I stared at him, my pulse hammering from disbelief. "You mean, all this time you've been pushing me toward a safer career because you were terrified of yourselves?" He swallowed hard, eyes falling to the pavement. "Maybe. Maybe we projected too much. Maybe we wanted you in a career with guaranteed stability so you wouldn't face what we're facing now." A rush of emotions surged up in me. Shock, confusion, and beneath it, anger. Anger that they had cloaked their personal fear in criticism, anger that their anxieties had become the chains around my choices. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she spoke, her voice quivering. "Julia, I wanted to be an interior designer once." The words felt like a sudden crack in the universe. "What?" She nodded faintly, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "I had plans. A portfolio. I loved creating spaces, blending colors, and playing with light. But my parents laughed at me, told me it wasn't a real career. They said, 'Find something practical. Find something that will last when dreams run out.' So I did. I became a teacher. It wasn't bad. But every time I watched you sketch when you were little, part of me remembered what I gave up. For several moments, I didn't breathe. My mother, the woman who had told me for years that art was unsafe, impractical, a hobby, was confessing she once carried the same dream. "You never told me this," I managed, my voice sharper than I meant. "How could I?" she said, tears sliding quietly down her cheeks. It felt like nothing but a reminder that I'd failed myself. So when I saw you, I panicked. I thought you'd go through the same heartbreak. And instead of supporting you, I tried to clip your wings before the wind could turn against you. We stood there in the chill of the late afternoon, city noises passing around us, while her words rearranged every memory I had. All the warnings, all the digs, all the sighs. It wasn't just disappointment. It was fear, a generational echo repeating itself through us. I wanted to forgive her on the spot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to weep at the cruelty of dreams denied and handed down like broken heirlooms. "So, all this time," I said slowly, forcing every syllable, "you weren't worried I couldn't succeed. You were worried I could, and then life might rip it away from me, just like it did you. Mom broke into sobs, quietly nodding. Dad looked away, loosening his tie as though the air itself had thickened. My fury softened, but only slightly. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the hurt itself. It just changes its shape. I wish you had told me sooner, I whispered finally. Do you have any idea how many nights I stayed awake thinking I was worthless because of what you said? How many times I questioned if I was childish, irresponsible, broken, just for wanting to design? Dad clenched his jaw, his voice breaking with rare humility. We were wrong, Julia, about how we tried to handle it. About what we said. We wanted control when we should have shown trust. For a long time, none of us spoke. A city bus screeched to a halt, people poured across the crosswalk. Life moved forward everywhere except at that tiny corner where the three of us hung in the limbo of our confessions. Where do we go from here? Mom whispered, wiping her cheeks. I don't want to lose you forever, please. I let the silence breathe. For the first time ever, they weren't telling me what to do. They were asking. That small tilt in balance shifted everything. I can meet you halfway, I finally said. But not on your terms. On mine. That means boundaries. That means no more belittling, no more comparisons. If you want me in your lives, you have to meet me as I am, not as who you wish I'd be. Mom nodded immediately. Dad hesitated, then gave one curt nod. It wasn't agreement so much as acknowledgement, but it was enough. We stood there a minute longer until Dad straightened, adjusting his sleeves. We'll try, he said. It's all we can promise. I exhaled slowly, a fragile truce balancing on the knife edge of our words. And yet, even as we parted ways, I couldn't help it. My body shook with uncertainty. An olive branch had been extended, yes. Their honesty cracked something open. But cracks can let in light, or they can widen into collapse. That night, I lay awake in my tiny room in Buckman, fairy lights glowing above me, Jenna's laughter drifting in faintly from the kitchen. I replayed every word of their confession, every tremor in their voices. They wanted to bridge the distance. But had the damage already gone too far? As sleep pulled me under, I asked myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. If forgiveness was possible, would I even want it? If anyone had told me a year earlier that my parents would sit across a small room and admit they had made mistakes, I would have laughed. Or cried, or both. For so long they seemed made of stone, unyielding, self-righteous, convinced their blueprint for my life was the only one worth following. But after that revelation outside my office, the confession of my father's career uncertainty, my mother's buried dreams, suddenly I was forced to reframe things. They weren't granite statues. They were fragile, flawed humans with their own fears dragging behind them. That realization softened something in me, but it didn't erase the damage. Understanding the reason for a wound doesn't stitch it closed. You still have to decide whether to touch it, whether to risk reopening it, or whether to let it scar silently. Days passed before I allowed myself to respond to their tentative overtures. My father, in his stiff way, began texting me short acknowledgments. Saw your logo work in the grocery store. Nice job, 13 words. But to me, they echoed like thunder. My mother went further. She forwarded me articles on design agencies, sometimes with notes like, "This made me think of you." At first, I kept my distance. One wrong step, and I'd slide back into the dynamic that choked me before. Then one evening, perched on my bed frame with a cup of leftover lentil soup warming my palms, my phone rang. This time, I answered. My mother's voice came hesitant but steadier than I expected. Julia, I've been thinking, maybe we need help, all of us. Keeping these conversations between us seems to keep us trapped. Would you consider family therapy? For a long moment, I stared at the fairy lights glowing on my wall. Therapy wasn't a word my parents used. Not in my childhood home. If someone had problems, you worked harder or shut them down. Yet here she was, suggesting we put ourselves in front of a stranger and learn how to speak without breaking things further. I'll go if Dad agrees, I finally said. There was a pause, then her soft reply, he already does. That was how, a week later, I found myself in a quiet office decorated with neutral colors. A box of tissues strategically placed between two couches. Across from us sat Dr. Lillian Carter, a woman in her 50s with calm eyes and a voice that carried authority and gentleness like she'd spent her entire life diffusing fires with one breath. The first session was brutal. Every unhealed bruise rose to the surface. I repeated dead weight out loud. My father flinched. My mother defended herself, then crumbled. Dr. Carter stopped us each time we slipped into accusations and guided us back with phrases like, "Try expressing how that felt for you, not what you think about them." It was exhausting. It was awkward. And yet, when we left, I realized something had changed. They weren't just dismissing me. They were listening. Imperfectly, painfully, but listening. By the third session, we had managed something small but enormous. My father admitted that his definition of success was shaped by his own fear of losing control. My mother admitted she sometimes lived through comparisons with Nicole because she needed external proof of worth. I admitted that independence hadn't made me immune to longing for their approval. That moment of mutual honesty, fragile as spun glass, was the closest we had come to speaking the same language in years. Meanwhile, my career erupted into a new phase. Ember Creative landed the largest client we had ever worked with, a regional chain ready for a complete rebrand campaign on a strict deadline. To my disbelief, Mia named me the lead designer. "You've proven you can handle pressure, Julia," she said in her matter-of-fact way, sliding the file to me. "Now prove you can carry an entire vision." The project consumed me. 14-hour days became routine. I swapped sleep for coffee, meals for drafts, socializing for typography revisions. Yet, paradoxically, I'd never felt more alive. For once, stakes meant opportunity, not punishment. On one particularly late night, hunched over color boards while the office sat dark around me, I felt my phone vibrate. A message from my dad. "How's the project?" I stared at the text. It was clumsy, perhaps even obligatory, but something in me wanted to answer. "It's big. It's intense, but I think I'm ready." His reply came faster than expected. "You've always been more ready than you think." "You just don't give yourself enough credit." The words pulsed on my screen long after he sent them. For the first time in a long time, his voice didn't sound like a blade pressing against me. It sounded almost like belief. During those weeks, my tiny Buckman bedroom turned into a laboratory of ambition. I plastered walls with drafts, angled my thrifted desk toward morning light, hammered out decks while Jenna peered over my shoulder and offered photographers' critiques. Zach dropped by with playlists to jumpstart my focus. My roommates didn't see hobbyist sketches. They saw work. Worthwhile work. And that fueled me when exhaustion threatened to drag me under. Yet, alongside the professional rush, the therapy sessions tugged me back to vulnerability. At one point, Dr. Carter asked directly, "Julia, do you think forgiveness is possible?" I hesitated. Possible? Maybe? Easy? Absolutely not. But I think I want it, eventually. On my terms. My mother's hand twitched as though she wanted to reach for mine and stopped. My father nodded once, silent but serious. In that pause, the possibility of new patterns shimmered in the air. By the end of the second month of the project, Ember's rebrand was nearly complete. Sleepless, over-caffeinated, pinned to screens, I still felt electric. Mia reviewed my final boards with a rare smile. "You've outdone yourself. This will put you and us on the map." That night, when I got home, I collapsed on my bed and stared at the ceiling, equal parts exhausted and triumphant. My phone buzzed again, this time from my mother. "When the campaign launches, can we come see it?" "We want to understand your world." The message left me breathless. Not just support, curiosity. My parents had never asked to step into my field before. I typed back, "If you're ready, I'd like that." It should have felt like a resolution. But instead, my chest swirled with unease. In rebuilding bridges, what if I'd left myself open to collapse again? Could fragile progress survive the weight of my parents inside my world? where I felt most vulnerable, and beneath that, a darker whisper crawled into my head. What if their acceptance was only temporary, a performance, a phase? What if when the campaign ended, they fell back into old habits? Those doubts clung to me as the project neared launch, like shadows in my brightly lit studio. And when the gallery invitation arrived, offering me a platform to display my design work in a showcase of emerging artists, it raised the biggest question yet. Should I invite them into that space too? The invitation came folded in thick ivory paper, the kind that felt important as soon as you touched it. Inside, the words seemed almost unreal. Portland Center for Creative Arts presents Emerging Designers and Artists Showcase. My name, printed neatly among the exhibitors, looked like it belonged to someone else. Someone bolder, more certain. Someone who never once lay awake wondering if her entire career had been a fool's gamble. I sat at my thrifted desk, the fairy lights above pooling soft gold across my walls, reading the invitation over and over until my chest trembled. This wasn't just another client project. This wasn't hidden behind brand names or corporate campaigns. This was me, Julia Hartley, designer, on full display for strangers and peers and whoever else wandered into that gallery. It was the most public, undeniable proof yet that all the sleepless nights, ramen dinners, and whispered pep talks to myself had meant something. Jenna squealed when I told her. She clapped her hands together, camera bouncing against her hip. "Julia, that's huge! That's career-changing." Zach raised his coffee mug in salute. "Told you you're more than just someone pushing pixels. You're making waves." Their pride filled the room like music, spilling hope into every corner. But under their joy, my stomach churned with a familiar ache. Because alongside the names of my supportive roommates and coworkers, one question whispered, relentless. Should I invite my parents? The thought haunted me. On one hand, they'd asked, begged even, to understand more about my world. Mom's message about wanting to see the campaign still lingered in my texts. Dad had softened, exchanging stiff authority for hesitant curiosity. And therapy had shown us fragile pathways forward. If there was ever a time to let them in, this was it. But the scars still stung. What if they came and dismissed it as childish once more? What if they compared my work to Nicole's corner office and six-figure salary? What if this rare night of triumph turned into an echo of every Sunday dinner debate that had gutted me before? Could I handle watching pride turn back into ridicule, right in front of my peers? For days, the decision gnawed at me while timelines and drafts demanded my attention. Ember's campaign project was almost complete. My apartment walls were covered in mock-ups I rehearsed presenting. And still, behind every layout, every color scheme, was the whispered uncertainty. Do I let them in? The breaking point came in one of our therapy sessions. Dr. Carter posed the question directly. Julia, this showcase represents who you are. If they come, you lose some control over how it feels. If they don't, you risk missing a chance for them to see you authentically. Which risk feels heavier? I thought long and hard, twisting the silver ring on my hand that I always fiddled with when nerves overtook me. Both risks feel terrifying, I admitted. But if they never see me, really see me, the relationship doesn't move forward. They'll still picture me as a child in my old room, playing pretend. They need to see me outside of their house, on my stage. My parents nodded quietly, neither interrupting. Dad's throat worked like it was hard to swallow, though he said nothing. Mom's eyes burned with a mix of guilt and pride. 2 nights later, I drafted the simplest text I could manage. There's a gallery showcase next week. My work will be there. If you want to come, it'd mean a lot. I left it bare, stripped of emotion, because if I dressed it up too much, I'd feel exposed. The reply came within 10 minutes, faster than I expected. Mom, we'll be there. No matter what, a smaller bubble appeared a minute later. Dad, proud of you. 2 words. And yet, for me, they carried the weight of years. That week I worked like I was preparing for battle. I collected pieces to display, approved client work, sketches from late nights, an experimental typography series I'd done just for me. Every choice mattered. This wasn't only about showing professionals my skill. It was about standing in front of my parents and saying, "See? This is my world. This is where I belong." Amanda promised she'd be there too, never failing to be my shield. "If they say one wrong word, I'll drag them out by the elbow," she said, eyes flashing as she poured cocktails at the bar after her shift. Jenna and Zach swore to be my hype squad, ready to clap the loudest and introduce me to every stranger as if they were my personal PR team. Mia, my boss, promised she and half the office would attend. The night before the showcase, I barely slept. My heart thudded like a bass line in my chest, thoughts tumbling dark and bright. What if nobody stopped at my exhibit? What if the spotlight revealed flaws I hadn't noticed? What if my parents' presence ruined everything? And yet, underneath the static of fear, a sliver of calm whispered, "You've survived worse. You survived dead weight. You survived leaving at dawn with nothing but a suitcase and a trembling note. If you could survive that, you could survive this." The afternoon of the showcase, I slipped into the gallery hours early. The space was an airy, refurbished warehouse with whitewashed brick walls and beams strung with soft lighting. Artists bustled around, arranging pieces, testing projections, checking tags. My name printed neatly on the placard beside my section made me dizzy. As I laid out my displays, smooth portfolio boards, glossy mock-ups, hand-sketched designs pinned with careful precision, I whispered to myself like a mantra, "This is who you are. This is your story told in color and line." By 6 o'clock, the gallery pulsed with people. Conversations hummed, wine glasses clinked, shoes echoed on the polished floor. My roommates stood like soldiers at my side. Amanda appeared in her bartender black dress, hugging me so tightly my ribs ached. "They texted me. They're on their way," she whispered. My throat went dry. The moment was coming. The moment where my fragile independence and my parents' harsh history would collide under one roof, in front of everyone. I smoothed my jacket, trying to quiet the tremor in my hands. As the door swung open again, letting in a burst of cold night air, I saw them. My parents, hesitant, scanning the crowd, searching for me. My breath caught. This was it. No buffer, no escape. Just the truth, laid bare on gallery walls. And as they started walking toward me, weaving through the crowd, I had to wonder, would this be the night they finally saw me? Or the night they broke me all over again? The crowded gallery buzzed around me like a hive, yet my world narrowed to two figures making their way across the room. My parents, my mother clutching her purse tightly against her side, my father scanning the displays as though he was stepping into a foreign country without a map. I stood frozen by my exhibit, hands folded together, pulse racing so loud it drowned out the chatter and the music drifting from the speakers. Dozens of people had already passed my work, stopping to look, to ask questions, to offer polite compliments. Yet their steps now felt heavier than all the others, their judgment sharper than any critique could ever cut. When they reached me, Mom hesitated. For a flicker of a second, it was like every childhood moment when she perched over my shoulder, watching me sketch in some notebook, admiration colliding with fear. This time, however, her lips parted not into a warning, but into awe. "Julia," she whispered, eyes moving across my boards, my typography spreads, the framed mock-ups of campaigns. "This is incredible." Dad said nothing at first, stepping closer to study the before and after branding of a client project mounted neatly on foam core. He traced a line of text with his eyes, then the color composition, his brow furrowed, not in disdain, but in concentration. He nodded once. Then, with deliberate weight, he said, "Now I see why your clients are impressed. This isn't a hobby. It's a real career. A successful one." The words landed like a shockwave. For years, I had starved for acknowledgement in their eyes. I had begged for them to believe me. And now, here, under strangers' gazes in a lit-up gallery, those words finally broke free. I felt my throat tighten, hot tears rising, but I forced a smile instead. Nearby colleagues drifted into the conversation, asking me questions, pointing out specific elements of my work. I watched my parents linger, almost uncomfortably, but not dismissively. My mother caught the arm of one acquaintance, proudly saying, "That's our daughter. That's her work." My father even slipped his card to someone who expressed interest in hiring me, as if suddenly seeing himself not as a skeptic, but as part of my support system. Later, when the energy began to slow, my parents pulled me aside to the edge of the gallery where the lights dimmed slightly. Mom reached for my hand. This time I let her take it. "I can see why you fought so hard," she said softly, eyes searching mine. "I can see why you chose this. You were right to follow it." Dad cleared his throat, and when he spoke, it wasn't commanding or dismissive. It was humbled. "You've built something real, Julia. You've built yourself. We should have listened sooner." I swallowed hard, emotions swelling so big they threatened to burst. "Respect," I whispered. "That's all I needed. Not perfection, not comparison, just respect. And for the first time in years." They both nodded. The evening ended with my roommates. Amanda, co-workers, and parents all standing near me, sides pressed in tight, laughter spilling among the hum of strangers. It wasn't perfect. The wounds weren't healed. But something new had begun. Their pride wasn't borrowed from some cousin. Their acceptance wasn't wrapped in conditions. It was fragile but real. When I walked home that night through Portland's cool streets, my exhibit still echoing in my mind, I realized something profound. I had spent so long searching for approval, thinking I'd only arrive when they gave it. But here's what I learned. Their approval wasn't the foundation. My courage was. Their respect wasn't the spark. My choices were. That night, I didn't just show them my work. I showed myself the power of staying true, even when the people you love most can't see it yet. Sometimes leaving is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But sometimes, leaving is the only thing that allows you, and even the people you leave, to grow into something stronger, deeper, braver. Because the truth is, respect isn't demanded. It's earned by living authentically enough that others have no choice but to finally see you. And if you're listening right now, maybe you know that struggle. Maybe you've had to choose between your path and your family's expectations. Maybe you've had to draw that line, even when it broke your heart. If so, then you already know. The bravest thing you can do is step into your own definition of success. My story doesn't have a perfect ending. It's the beginning, but it's mine. And that is enough. Thank you for staying with me through my journey. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with someone who might need to hear these words tonight. And tell me in the comments, which country and city are you watching from right now? I'd love to know where this story finds you.